The original version of this video was uploaded to Jason Verney's YouTube channel, where it and many other videos, podcasts, snippets and films can be found. That channel can be found at youtube.com/Jason Verney. This is the Not So Korean podcast. I am Jason Verney. As you probably know, we started this podcast back in 2021 and used to record this live in UK's Koreatown itself. That's an area in and around New Malden. Yes, that's the largest Koreatown and Korean community in Europe. These days, we bring you such episodes and therefore information and interviews from various places in the world, including Korea itself. This is the Not So Korean podcast. I am Jason Verney. Now, we've got a lot to cover in this episode, and I want to just say where I'm broadcasting from. It's a very hot recording space here in Phuket, Thailand. This is a bit different to where I was before. If you heard episode 46, it was regarding Hongdae-salgi. I might have pronounced that wrong, so apologies, but this was regarding 1 month living for Koreans, and essentially it kind of came up because of ChiangMai. Lots of Koreans there, so if you're interested in that, then please feel free to check that episode out. I have just come back from Korea. I was there for about 5 weeks, and if you heard that episode that I just mentioned, there was talk of that in that particular episode, and I've got a lot to cover in this one. There is the chance that this is going to be coming out simultaneously with an interview episode, and I'm going to speak about that anyway in this episode, because also that person I interviewed was connected to the film festival that I went to Korea for, and yes, I will speak more about that in this particular episode of the Not So Korean podcast. That Hongdae-salgi episode was one of our not so long Korean podcast episodes, so which we like to abbreviate, or I like to abbreviate into the, I call the Not So Korean podcast the NoSoKoPo. So the shorter ones, or the kind of subject specific ones, are sometimes the NoSoKoPo, not so long Korean podcast. So much has happened in those 5 weeks when I was away, and a bit like when I went earlier in the year, I went to Korea for the Sewol ferry 10-year anniversary. A lot happened here this time around, but the reasons were different, to why I was in Korea, and also the dynamics were different for me personally, because I was there for different reasons. I wasn't there to rush around different cities on that 10th trip, which was coincidentally, kind of planned, the 10th anniversary of the Sewol ferry. I did move around a lot. I landed in Cheongju, I went to Seoul, I went to the outskirts of Seoul, the sort of Gyeonggi-do province, Jeonju for the film festival, Gwangju, Jeju, Busan, and it was a very somewhat, I didn't have time to think or get sort of frustrated, whereas this particular time I did. And I will talk a little bit about that as we go. Now, if you've seen the thumbnail, the image for this particular episode, which, as I say, is going to go out almost simultaneously, perhaps within a few days of the interview episode. Which one is going first? I haven't quite decided. But if you look at that thumbnail, there was so much that I could have crammed into that picture that I kind of almost could have come up with a letter of the alphabet for sort of 26 topics, but I've got it down to about sort of 8 topics, but really there's more than that. I like wordplay and letter play and number play, and I've kind of put that into it. So we're going to be discussing various things that occurred on this 11th trip, various things that happened with friends, with interviews coming up, at film festivals in particular, because I want to talk about the new one that I was part of in Seoul, and also, as I say, the upcoming guest, or the episode which is going to be almost simultaneously released with alongside this one, his involvement, another person's involvement who is also one of our guests in the past, and a bit more. So there's more than that as well. There's ghosts. Now that's due to one of the guests and a tour I went on. We're going to talk a bit about Halloween, Hongdae, which I stayed for all of my time in Seoul. About hanging out there, partly due to one of the film festivals. And of course, talking about Halloween, I was also intentionally in Korea and stayed in Korea long enough to be there for the Itaewon tragedy memorial. And so I'm going to cover that all in this episode, as well as the area I stayed in Busan. It was somewhere I haven't stayed before, and that general area, how I was feeling, what projects I was getting on with, why I didn't get this episode out sooner, why that guest, I spoke about this guest in the last show, and actually guests, because there's at least two who are kind of lined up to be put out on this podcast. So it's really hot here. Where I was before, Chiang and I'm going back to Chiang which is, is a heavy Korean there's a heavy Koreanness in that city, heavy Korean visitors, people living there, community, let's call it. Where I'm down in Phuket because my sister, who's a different sister to the one who came earlier this year or at the end of last year, is visiting Thailand for her first time, but she is staying in Phuket, which is the southern part of Thailand. It's called an island, really. People class it as an island, but on the map it looks like a huge chunk of Thailand, because it's both of those things. But I guess what I was trying to say about the reason I mention it is because it's really hot. We are coming into hot season, so the temperatures do drop slightly. But right now, in my recording space, it's pretty warm. Of course, I've had the aircon on, a fan, but I can't really, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I want the sound to be as best as I can do without something humming in the background. And being a perfectionist is another excuse as to why I haven't put these episodes out yet. And as I say, to make up for that, I'm kind of putting two out around the same time. If they're not simultaneously on the same day, they'll be within the few days or within a week. And that's the plan. Let's go on to the first topic, and my reason for going to Korea this time around, because I came back after the 10th trip, and believe me, I had come back. First of all, I'd come back after my 9th trip, and it was December. I'd never experienced any days in December in Korea before, so I came back, and then so soon, and I went again, which was April and May. And that was partly to time with the Sewol ferry thing. But when I came back after that 10th trip, I said to myself, I'm not going to travel anymore. But then somebody who I had met at the Jeonju International Film Festival in April, it was in May after the Sewol ferry, but there was 6 films relating to Sewol ferry, and I met the directors of various films, spoke to quite a few people, joined them with sort of a party or something, and one of them was coincidentally setting up a film festival. And when I had come back to Thailand, that person contacted me and said, would I like to be a judge? And of course I said yes. I alluded to this very briefly on my last episode because I didn't want it to be about that. It was essentially about Handal Salgi. They asked me to come, and I was to be flying to fly over there. And also I spoke very briefly about this on that last episode, but also if you go to miniminimovie.com, that's a website which relates to a lot of Korean stuff. I've been running it since 2010 or 11. It's got Korean film reviews, it's got Korean film events, it's got non-Korean stuff as well. It's got a film podcast fed into it that I do of films, not just Korean, some Thai films and that. Also, if you go back to 2012, 2013 and 14, there's interviews with actors from Korea, and there's been interviews from a couple of years ago or so, but there's a lot back then. There was directors, people involved with production design. Yeah, in fact, one of those people was actually at BIFF, and there was a focus on her, Ryu Song-yi. What I was trying to say was I wasn't really wanting to pop back to Korea, but I was asked to, and that gave me the goal of to go back. Now, I thought to myself, do I go back to South Korea for 3 days for the festival? I've never been to Korea that short, in that such a short time before. I think I've done a week before or 2 weeks. I can't remember my first ever visits to Korea, 2012, and then a couple of visits in 2013. They would have been relatively short, but the ones more recently have been up to 3 months, with a little bit less. Anyway, I decided to kind of go a month early, or 5 weeks early. I'll have my birthday, which is early October, very early October, and that had become a tradition. But I then thought to myself, there's some music events happening at the end of September. Someone who's been a guest on our show, which is Annie Ko, she was one of our guests. If you go back to about 3 episodes, we spoke about, because she's adopted a rescue dog, and the episode is devoted to dogs and animals, Dog Meat, the ban that recently had been enforced in Korea. And we spoke about dogs as pets, about whether she had tried dog, and in fact the guest I'm going to speak about later, which is Joe McPherson, and I'll elaborate more on him in a little while. We also talk about eating dog in that episode. Anyway, so they were playing a gig or a set in a part of a bigger music promotion or festival in Hongdae. And I thought, right, if I can go there at the end of September and catch them, because I haven't actually seen them play much. I think I've seen them a couple of times over the years, but I've been friends with Annie and Toby, who are the two people who make up Love Exterior, essentially, apart from the musicians who might work with them, and also the ones who tour with them. And so I thought, right, see if I can do this and see if I can time this. They were actually playing 2 dates in Seoul at the end of September. I decided in the end what I was going to do, so I arrived towards the end of September. I think it was the 26th. I went to see them play, and then the following day I actually saw a couple of people in Seoul at that time, but it's something that I've not done before, or not done for a long time. If I have done it, is leave Seoul 1 day after. Normally I stay in Seoul for handful of days or less, 3, 4, 5 days, maybe 10 days. I can't remember right now, but I very rarely do that. So and also I've got a few sort of growing number of friends in Busan. I thought, well, if I do celebrate my birthday in any significant way, I've got friends down there. The friends in Seoul, I'm coming back. I plan to come back to Seoul at the end of October, partly because of the festival that I'm talking about, which is the Seoul Whistler Film Festival. And as I say, this episode is going to touch on that quite a bit, because I really want to give them a shout out. But I was going to be back in Seoul for a week, and I don't normally stay in Hongdae for that amount of time, but I thought, right, if I'm going to be there for 3 days for the film festival, I will stay in one place. There's no point moving. Yeah, so that sort of 36 hours or so after after me arriving direct from ChiangMai to Seoul, or Incheon Airport, I stayed awake. I didn't sleep on the plane much, and I think it was a real record sort of short flight that I've ever done actually, bear in mind ChiangMai is a different location to Bangkok, but even so, I still thought that the time, because I've been Bangkok to Seoul more often than I have ChiangMai to Seoul, but it was still the quoted time for the flight was probably 5.5 hours, but it was more like 4.25 hours. It just, and of course there's a time difference, but it was a record time. I didn't sleep much, partly due to that, just due to, trying to sleep on a plane. Not everyone can do it. When I arrived, I didn't go and rest, and I just stayed awake, up for the whole day, and that included seeing some musicians play in Seoul, and of course Love X Stereo do their set. But I did choose to meet, or rather the people that I did meet in that very small sort of 36 hours was my friend Ginny Park, and we've been friends for a while, and she's kind of was, she knows a lot about the indie music scene in Korea. She also lived in London for a while. My friend Hyuk Young, and she's become a good friend over the last couple of years. And Jihan, who I know from way back in 2000, maybe 11, 12, and she used to work at the Korean Cultural Center, and we've kind of collaborated. Well, we've been interested in one another's projects for a while. She had an art exhibition in Seoul. So on the 27th, I'm pretty sure it was the 27th, after landing on the 26th, I went down to Busan. But on the way, I was determined to see her exhibition, because if it would be finished by the time I would come back from Busan. So I wanted to, see what, and it was a small exhibition, but she'd put a lot of work into it, and I'm very proud of her, actually. So that was Seoul. And I had to say to friends, the thing is, as I've been going to Korea more and more, not only do you accumulate friends or acquaintances, people that you've met that you want to catch up with, maybe even interview, it's just not possible, because you're never going to have enough time in the world. And also, who's more busy than others, or who have more obligations in their life than other people. So I just don't necessarily go out of the way to contact people if the likelihood. I know that there's certain times that there's certain people that go to the Busan International Film Festival, which is another reason why I decided to go a month early to catch that, and that will come into play in a short while. I will touch on the Busan International Film Festival, but what I was going to say was there's certain people who I often bump into down there, or who I know are down at the Busan International Film Festival. My first time attending that was 2012, and we are now 2024. It's the 29th one. I mean, for example, I bumped into Darcy Paquette, and Darcy, who if you know Korean cinema, Korean film, he's well known for subtitling. He's also done some cameo acting or acting in films, and he runs a film festival, the awards sort of festival, Wildflower. So we met and sort of sat and had a bit of a bite to eat, although it was quite funny, because he had just finished his food, and I just entered the same place, and we had a little chat, and it was really nice. And actually, a decade ago or so, I did interview him. I've got a video interview from years ago. I was making a documentary where I interviewed a lot of people, and it took shape in a different way, and at some point in the future there will be something that comes out relating to that, just even if from a retro feel, or how Korean cinema and the industry and stuff has changed maybe. So I knew that I could see people down there. So right, we're now away into this this episode. So I went to Busan, and I felt good. A couple of days into my trip, I then sort of felt I'm not on a mission this time. So I should say this. When I was the plan to stay in Busan for a month it would just about work out right for a month's stay. I sometimes use Airbnb, and if you do sort of 4 weeks or whatever, you can get a good deal, and you can stay anywhere in the world. Some places reduce the price by 50%, or you can get a good deal, and the same goes for Korea. If you want to stay somewhere like that, I could do something different. I could get in touch with my Korean friends, and actually I did do that. I did consider it, not staying with them, but there are other options. If you're Korean, or if you can speak or read Korean language, you've got a lot more options. But as a foreigner, I know what my options are really. and I timed it so that if I get down on the 27th, I could then be back in Seoul on the 25th, and I wouldn't have wasted money, let's say, staying in Seoul for a few days and then, not capitalizing or, using up my time wisely for a month's stay, or pretty much a month, in Busan. So that was part of the reason. Anyway, so the good thing was this time, though, getting to Busan sort of 3 or 4 days before Busan International Film Festival started, it gave me some time, rather than rush to Busan and get immersed in the films. And a lot of the films I see are Korean. It is one of Asia's biggest film festivals, but it's an international film festival, so it's not just Korean cinema. But this time I kind of got to know my area, and I stayed in, I will say this now, I might touch on it a bit later, but I stayed in an area near Busan International University, which is a little bit far from where the film festival is, but I knew that, like Seoul, Busan is very well designed with its metro system, and logistics of getting around are pretty make things really easy and swift, so maybe I had a couple of changes on the metro and then I'm in the place where I want to be. But I never stayed that kind of north of the city, Busan International University, but the actual metro stop I was just away from. And again, if you refer to the thumbnail or picture for this particular episode, you'll see there's a place, Jangjong, and that is the metro stop that I stayed near. And I'm talking about it because I've stayed in various places in Busan over the years, and I hadn't stayed there. But if you just walk along 10 minutes, it's the Busan International University. So there's more stuff and more cafes and what have you at the university area, although they are really connected, I would say, by the back streets to an extent. So that there's a mixture of what's popular in the university area, because a university area, just because it is the Busan University metro stop or whatever, it doesn't mean to say it's everything's there. Stuff gets spread around and it sprawls across a city or a small part of a city. What I liked about it there, right next to the metro line, right under the metro almost, or at least when you walk along, you're almost under it. And I can see what they've done, which they've done in a few parts of Korea. They've sort of gentrified a stream area, like the Cheonggyecheon River in Seoul. They've kind of, it's gentrified, it's more clean and modern, and that runs along under the metro sort of the almost monorail, the sort of raised metro line. But it was an interesting experience staying there, and yeah, it was. I would definitely go back there. It was just somewhere that was available, and it was in my sort of budget. Yeah, and let's remember that I was coming to Korea for the film festival that was happening at the end of October, so I still had plenty of time. So Busan International Film Festival started. I made my most of that. 1 or 2 days I kind of sat out of it, because you get to a point where you just don't want to see films. I think I saw 5 films. That was my max in one day. Maximum, and that's probably the maximum anyone can do, but 4 is just about doable most of the time. I think the reason I managed to do 5 in one day is because if you really want to, you can catch a film at 9 a.m. depending where it's showing one, and then I had an industry pass, kind of a festival badge, because I'm a filmmaker. I kind of get granted one of those, and I apply for it, and you get it, hopefully. And so the press industry films, they start at 11 a.m. or 11:30 depending. So you've then got 4 films if you really want to sit through. Other years I've kind of missed out on certain films, and I thought, right, rather than me plan this too much, I'm going to see the press and industry films. Bear in mind those screenings, I'm sorry if this is boring to people that aren't interested in this, but I just want to get this out of the way. Those press screenings are only there for the first 3-4 days or so. So once those are out the way, there aren't any more press industry screenings. But the good thing about those screenings, if you've got one kind of pass, a press pass or a festival pass, you're pretty much guaranteed. I mean, it is first come, first serve, but those screenings are rarely, or if ever, full up. So, and I think certain people, like press people, they can see films. There are other ways to see the films. You get different badge allowances. You can see films in a kind of a screening, on a monitor in a screening room, kind of on like a PC or computer, and you can watch it like that. So we go past the film festival. It was really good. I met quite a few people. I didn't go to many parties. I went to one, I think, maybe two. One, the Indonesian party, and it was a nice event. But I used to go to Busan. Partying is part of it. In fact, there was a film all about the guy who was behind the start of the Busan International Film Festival, and the parties were a thing, a bit like they are probably in Cannes or other places actually. But I used to drink, and I wasn't focused on the films, and I don't anymore. And I can go to those if I want, and it also depends on the locations of the parties and where my screenings were before. Right, we're through the festival, and I'm now settled in Busan for another 2 or 3 weeks, and I was feeling a bit frustrated, a bit down even, because as I said, on my 10th trip, I didn't have time to think. I was on a mission. There was Sewol ferry related, there was the Jeonju Film Festival. I did have a great time in Hamdok and Jeju in May before I left to come back to Thailand. But even then, actually, I went to Sewol ferry building, the Sewol, I forget what the name of it. It's a memorial building, a beautiful building on Jeju, not far from the Jeju Sasam museum, memorial park. Jeju Sasam is the Jeju 3rd of April massacre that happened. I'd urge you to look that up if you don't know about it, but a lot of people know about the Gwangju 518, the 18th of May uprising or massacre, but this one just as significant, and a lot more people were killed basically. But anyway, so I'm working back to that to say that this time I didn't really have this. Now, I'm never bored. I've got a lot of stuff going on. So you might be thinking, well, if I've got a lot of stuff going on, I had a lot of time to myself. You might be thinking, well, why didn't I get this podcast out? Well, partly because I wanted to talk about this trip, so I hadn't completed the trip, and I definitely hadn't been to the Seoul Whistler Film Festival, which is where I was to be judge at. And again, there's a couple of articles already on my website, because I was also an official supporter of that. Not a sponsor, a supporter. If you go to minimovie.com, you'll see a couple of articles, and the people behind that were really good, and I really praise what they did. And as I say, I will come to that. That is the point of this episode, or one of the points. So when I was in Busan, I was a bit, I wasn't feeling it in some ways. My place was okay where I was staying. It was okay. And, the area was all right. And of course, I've got friends in Busan. I met a couple of them. But I must give a shout out to Arise. It's an art space that were playing some films on a Sunday. And they have art exhibitions, of course. They're more in the Suyang area. So it's quite near to Hongdae, near to Gwangali, near to where I stayed before. And I think that what they do is really good. And I went to the film nights. I missed the first one, and I have to miss the last one, but I saw the two in the middle, and they were doing 4 films relating to saints and sinners, or gods and demons, saints and sinners. And I think it was a really nicely curated weekly event, and it was a shame to miss the last one, really. But yeah, they had some good films, and they kind of keep it secret, or they give a hint, quite a big hint actually, to the films that are actually going to be screening. And I really wish them well, because I think they're doing a great job there in Busan. So I know a few people because of that, and the artists. And I bumped into Anna, and she's been one of our last guests on the show, Anna Bondarenko, and she runs an art space in Songjong area of Busan. So it's not like I didn't see people, but there was days when I just wanted to, put my head in my laptop and just get on with stuff. But as I say, you might be thinking, well, if I had time and I didn't get stuff done, why didn't I get this and the other interview episodes out? Well, I've got a structure to how I work. I actually put a couple of videos out as well. One video I put out, which was to do with the flash floods that were happening in Busan while I was there, and sort of drawing comparisons to the floods that I'd witnessed and were still going on in ChiangMai. And also, something I haven't really mentioned, I've been working on a Sewol ferry documentary, which at this point in time it's titled District Sewol, but it might be changing because that is only one part of the documentary. But there was some talk that I would be able to, or there was some talk about the Seoul Whistler Film Festival. Maybe I could kind of not promote the film because obviously I'm a judge and I can't show my films, but there was some talk about I could, show a cut of that film to certain people. So I was also working on some days on that film. I was also working on that, and that's still taking shape. I'm liking how it's evolving, and I will tell people more about that when I get a bit further down the line. And in fact, that reminds me, when I spoke to Annie Ko and Toby, because I didn't mention, I actually meant them very briefly after their gig in Seoul. We had already spoken about using some of the, in fact we'd spoken before in the past about having permission to use one or two of their music tracks in future projects. So I just forgot to mention I actually did meet them. It was really brief, but that's to do with that project. So I did bury my head in some great, what was it, Busan Coffee. It's a really interesting, huge coffee place on that same road that I was staying in, Jangjong. But some days I just wasn't feeling. I thought, what am I here? Why am I here? And also, I must say this, and I might have mentioned this on other podcast episodes. I forget sometimes because I've also got a podcast relates to micro-budget filmmakers. I've also got a ChiangMai podcast that is on a different channel to my YouTube, which incidentally, my YouTube is youtube.com/Jason Verney. But I've recently started one which is under youtube.com/I landed in Thailand. So it's island like an island. I landed in Thailand, and I put episodes of about ChiangMai on there, and there will be other things, but I wanted to keep it separate from this channel. You might be listening to this on Spotify or Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, or you might be listening to this through a video version on the NoSoKoPo podcast channel, which is on YouTube, or you might be listening to it via Jason Verney. So I just put that out there while I remember. So I was getting on with stuff in Busan, but I wasn't quite feeling it, and I was working on other things. Oh yeah, sorry, I knew I was going to say diet. Now when I'm staying in Thailand, I love Thai food. I like Korean food, don't get me wrong, but there's certain dietary requirements that I have, and in living in Thailand, even in the most Thai areas of Thailand or certain places, you can find the food that I want. In South Korea, I don't want bibimbap 3 times a day. I might have a tuna, a samgap gimbap, which is the triangular rice cake things with seaweed, which you find in convenience stores. But again, it's a tricky thing for me. I was fortunate enough that when I was staying in Busan for this month, there was a Thai place along the road, and he did, it's always an interesting take when Korea does like Vietnamese or Thai or Indian. It's of course, like England, we adapt the taste sometimes, and in Korea it's different, so it's more Koreanized, I would say. And you've got side dishes maybe like gherkins or something, because that's what you get with Thai food, banchan, sort of side dishes. Anyway, let's fast forward to the end of my time in Busan. I did also meet, and this will also be connected to the Seoul Whistler Film Festival. I did meet up with my friend and friend of the show, James Turnbull, and if you go back several episodes, you will see our interview with him. He runs the Grand Narrative, but he and also Joe McPherson were also brought into the Seoul Whistler Film Festival, and I will talk about that in a second. So we're now kind of nearing the end of my time in Busan, and you're probably thinking, well, hopefully I'm nearing the end of my time on this podcast episode. Well, yes, I am. And once I headed back to... Oh yeah, there's one more thing. When I was in Busan, I met my friend Yeji, and it's always great to hang out with her. And we went to some art stuff, and I think that was actually on my birthday, so I was really grateful. I didn't have a big gathering for my birthday. I just met, for example, James on one day. I think it was the night before my birthday. We went for an Indian. We've had there's a Bollywood Busan. It's become a tradition for myself and James. We've been for an Indian there, and we've done that on a regular basis. But yeah, Yeji, but also other friends. We went to another art place, but on my last full day, I decided to go to Hongdae temple, and I thought to myself, there was a friend of mine who was actually visiting Korea, a filmmaker friend, a year or so ago, and we talked about going to Hongdae temple at that time, but we never went. And I thought, right, it's actually not too far from the stop on the metro line. You just had to go to the end of the metro line of the line I was on, which is the red or orange line, just to go up about 4 stops and then get a bus. But it's not the famous temple that everyone who goes to Busan talks about. I've been there more than 2 or 3 times, I'm sure. But this one is a very grand place. It's also a very important place in Korea's history. And what, I think there's a lot of history with what the Japanese did or tried to do to it. But I did think to myself on that last day, because as I say, I'm never bored. I'm never sort of bored with not doing anything. I don't want to be a tourist every day when I'm in these countries, because I know there's loads of things I haven't seen in Korea. I don't want you to think, I don't want anyone listening to think, I've been and done everything. I certainly haven't. I do want to, just stop running around. I do want to get stuff done and just immerse myself in the locations that I'm in. But I did, when I went to this place and got on the bus, and it's only like a 30-minute bus. It's not, I've been to Gwangju by bus and other places by bus from Busan, and of course that's a longer trip. But this, the price of the tickets in Seoul, in Korea, for bus journeys and long distance coach journeys, so reasonable. You can also cancel, refund, and you can do the same with trains. It's not like I'm used to in the UK. It's not like that. And I just got this feeling of liberation and sort of, just getting out. And I thought, why didn't I do more of these excursions while I was there for, once the film festival had finished, why didn't I, or even before it, why didn't I do more of this? I thought, I could have done. I had time to do it. But again, I get like this with projects that I've gone on. I've got too much going on, really, or at least it feels like it. Script writing, documentary I'm working on, some video art, podcasts, more than one, and writing articles for my minimovie.com website and jasonverney.com. I put that website together, and that's a work in progress. And I thought, I really like this. I thought, if I come back to Korea next year, or maybe the year after, maybe I'll come back to the film festival. I don't know. And I haven't forgotten that I'm going to talk about the Seoul Whistler Film Festival in a second. I just thought, if I could come back on a mission of going to certain places on buses, now bear in mind it's going to be more expensive if you're going to stay somewhere different. Now, if you're taking day trips, that's not so bad. But if you want to do it as kind of move around the country, I have moved to places. I've been to places that some other people don't go to. I've been to Kimchi twice because I've got a friend there, but not many people I know go to Korea and go to Kimchi. I've been to Jojiwon and Sejong City because my film I had in a festival, my Reparation film, the 30-minute drama, which is Korean and English, a mix, that was playing in a film festival. I've been to places, but I just felt like on that last day, this feels quite liberating, and I love this. I love that kind of, I'm on a schedule. I'm doing something. I'm on a mission, basically. Anyway, it was a nice day out. It was good weather, and I had a coffee and an ice cream, I think, at the temple, and I made my way back. And then the next day, I headed to Seoul. So I checked out my Busan accommodation, headed to Seoul, and I was cutting it fine because the film festival started on the 25th, but there was no obligation to me to be there at a certain time as long as I was there before the festival started, preferably. I got there, and that's where we'll start talking about that. So I've still got a couple more subjects to speak of. They are primarily the interviews coming up, or running alongside this, depending when this one gets put out. The Itaewon, I did some sort of activism, paying respects to the Itaewon people lost in the Itaewon stampede or tragedy that happened 2 years ago, and the Seoul Whistler Film Festival. So if we just jump right back on the KTX now, that's me. I'm heading back up to Seoul, and yes, for that evening the Seoul Whistler Film Festival was beginning. Over the course of 3 days, I was going to see Joe McPherson, James Turnbull. So Joe McPherson, who I'm going to touch on a bit more. There was a few judges at this film festival. The person, I'll just give a shout out to Solji, the woman called Solji, who, without her, this wouldn't have happened. There is other people involved behind the scenes that also, had a big say in this, but she's the one I communicated with a lot. And at some point, there was suggestion of other people, and I could think of a lot of people in Korea that could be judges or help out with judging, and two of the people I thought of was Joe McPherson. He's got a 20-year, both these people have lived in Korea for a couple of decades. And James Turnbull, as I say, James Turnbull runs the Grand Narrative. He's been a guest on our podcast, or Not So Korean podcast. Joe McPherson I've known since, first meeting was in 2014 at the Taste of London Film Festival, when Korea Foods they were promoting Korea food, ironically. They had 10 stalls. I was a part of that. I was kind of a volunteer or paid volunteer, or whatever you want to call us. We were promoting Korean food and drink. I was drinking back then as well. But that's when I first met Joe McPherson, and we kept in contact, got to know each other a bit more over the years. But he, I will just come back to what he does in a second. But I was to see Joe and James over the duration of the film festival. Now, we have our own commitments outside of the film festival, but we would attend as best we could over those 3 days, or at least 2 of those days. And it was really nice to see a couple of friends of mine and familiarity in people I'd met in Jeonju, because this is where this all came about for me, because of a Sewol ferry related film. Director Solji and other people involved with the festival I had met before. Carl, these names won't mean anything to you, but Carl resides in Japan, and he came back over, and it was good to see him like 6 months or 4 or 5 months after I'd been in Korea. It was quite surreal, this experience, because I'd met these people once or twice before, and to see them again so soon. I meet a lot of people in Korea, and everywhere I go really, but in Korea, and you don't sometimes see them again for 5 years. And one example, when I was in Busan, I met my friend, her name's Gyeongju, like the city actually, and we hadn't seen each other for 7 or 8 years, and we hung out, and it was really nice. Back to the Seoul Whistler Film Festival. I was taken aback by how well it was organised. I've been to bigger film festivals, or ones that have been longer running, and they've not been necessarily organised so well. And for a first time, this was its inaugural year, the first time the film festival had run, the work that had gone into it behind the scenes, and I knew that Solji and the team were working really hard, but it felt professional. It felt like, and every person who was involved, and now, for example, the host or the interpreter or the moderator on the times, especially when there was like a Q&A, they felt like they were invested in the film festival. They were passionate about the subjects. And I went to, myself and Carl, we went to a forum, I think it was, where we had directors from Syria, Israeli directors. I think there was a few foreign directors. It wasn't just Korean films. It was an international kind of film festival. About 23 films, about 6 feature films, and the rest were shorts. The questions I think they asked were very poignant and obviously relevant questions. Otherwise, there's no point asking a question if it's not relevant. But I felt like the people involved, they were compassionate. I met a lot of them. There was kind of, after party, the first evening and the last night, and even on the middle night, on the Saturday night, there was a bit of a food, and I didn't stay too long, but there was a bit of a, eating. Of course, I've got my little requirements, and I don't drink, but the people I met, and the stories I shared, there was one of the bereaved, one of the parents of the Sewol ferry, he was there, and I'd actually met him in Jeonju. And so this family, this group of people, for the Seoul Whistler Film Festival, where they were all just immersed in it, but they were all invested in it, you know, not in a financial way. You know, you could see it. They weren't just here for the, you know, sort of egos or glory, or it just felt like people were compassionate about it. And I really wish them luck. Perhaps I'll be involved next year, I don't know, but I really wish them good luck next year, because they've just done a great job of putting such a thing on. It's not easy to run a film festival. I've never actually run one. I've been involved with one. I was involved with Kingston International Film Festival. Again, my film was showing there. It was the UK premiere, but again, mine wasn't in competition. If your film's in competition, then you can't obviously be a judge. You know, these festivals, you know, I haven't been involved with that many, but it just felt like they made it look like it had been put together with ease, I suppose. And it hadn't, because that's not an easy thing to do. And it wasn't. I've experienced working with some Koreans and non-Koreans and events put together at the very last minute, and there was none of that feeling. I didn't get any of that feeling. Yeah, there was the judging process that we were involved with. There's the lead up to the film festival where there was involvement, and there was me writing articles about the film festival, and I wanted to anyway, because I was really passionate about it. And the films they chose and curated, there was a lot of talk about the sections. I think it was curated very well. Yeah, we had documentaries, a feature, features, shorts, documentaries, fiction. Yeah, and they even had little whistles you could blow, because it's Seoul Whistler Film Festival. The Whistler element, and I can tell you the Whistler element comes from whistleblower. So, but these films weren't all about, you know, some activism or anything. They were just meaningful stories. Kind of whistleblowing, maybe, you know, blowing the whistle, that the uncovering stories that should be seen and, you know, should be told. And I think that they did that in a really good way. I'm not sure if there's anything else I'm going to mention about this festival, but if you want to read more, if you go to minimovie.com, then you can read a couple of articles. There might even be a third one popping up there soon. But it was great to see Joe, as I say, he being part of this festival, because his involvement was great, and it was good to catch up with him and film directors and film people and even non-film people, because as I say, I mean, Joe's not a film person. He's got a background in TV and stuff and podcasting, and I'll come onto him in a second, because he'll be one of the final things I mention, because it leads into that other episode. But I will say the final film of there was films that had been repeated, so there was played once and then played again. For example, that happens sometimes with a film festival. On the opening night, the main film will be screened, and sometimes that film will be screened again throughout the festival at least once. And so that happened with a few films. They were screened again, but we're only talking 3 days, and we're only talking 23 films. But 6 of those are features, so you've got to think about the structure, and there was talks going on, you know, sort of running alongside that. I just think it was really well put together. But the film that it ended with was actually one regarding Itaewon. And I'm saving this till last. Well, it is the last film of the festival as well, but it kind of plays into the Itaewon tragedy, which, I mean, this film festival ended on the 27th. And the tragedy, so this was when the film was showing, the tragedy happened on the 29th of October 2022, so it was very close to that. And I think on the 26th there was in the main part of Seoul, or the centre of Seoul, there was the main let's call it a main memorial, the anniversary event took place. Now I didn't attend that, but I did make up for this. But it was good to see that film. It was a very interesting film. I met the director and activist who she helped me with the events that were happening on the 29th. I had seen a poster or a flyer or an image on social media, etc., about what was happening, but I couldn't quite make it all out. And what followed was, so once the Seoul Whistler Film Festival had finished, I then gave me a day to myself on the 28th. I can't remember if I met friends on that day, but the 29th I met another friend. I think that was the day I met Fran Lee. If anyone's Facebook friends with me and others, he's got a hell of a lot of mutual friends. He deals with music, and he's lived in England, and he's a very knowledgeable man in lots of fields. But that day I met him, we met in a city hall area, and that's not far from. Well, first of all, it's where the Sewol ferry small memorial tent exists, and just down the road there is the Itaewon Memorial Building, which I hadn't seen before, because before, when I was here even 6 months ago, it was the proper memorial, there's a word for it, the altar for the victims in the City Hall area, but in a different place and very prominent. But this had been moved somewhere else, and I went to see them, and very brief, because the time was against me, and it hadn't occurred to me that, well, I think it was, I went over to where I thought the altar was still there. It wasn't. So I then, by means of establishing where the building was, I went to that really quickly. I spoke to a couple of the parents of the bereaved, the children, the people that were, and these were mostly Koreans, but there was a few foreigners as well, because this happened in Itaewon. It's a very vibrant but also very foreign, mixed ethnicities area, international area of Seoul. So I rushed there, I spoke to them, I got some information, and then I headed over to Itaewon itself, and because I got the details about these events. And at 1634, which was the time, let me get this right, this is the time in 2022, this was the time that the first person contacted the emergency services on that fateful night. We're talking about nearly 160 people lost their lives. I mean, the safety measures that weren't put in place was other factors, but I'm not going to go into all that. And I went there, I respectfully sort of got some snippets of that, shared it with my Sewol UK friends, because we have been going, for anyone who's new to this podcast, and for anyone who's got this far in a podcast episode, in the UK for more than 10 years, since the Sewol ferry incident happened, we've been running a monthly memorial, mostly in Trafalgar Square, but sometimes in New Malden, which is Europe's biggest Koreatown, which is where this podcast started. And we've held it in Cambridge and other places, but every month for 10 years. In COVID times, of course, we brought it online to Zoom calls and paid our respects, etc. Later on, I fed back these snippets and photos. There was a lot of media there. And then at 7 o'clock, I'd been informed that the next metro stop along, which I'd literally just walked to, it wasn't far at all. I think it's called NoSoKoPo. I might have got that wrong, so I'm not looking at anything to double check that. But then there was music, poetry, and stuff all relating to the Itaewon incident. And it was actually near one of the Comfort Women statues, which is, again, that's something else I went to while in Seoul. There's many Comfort Women statues. If you're not sure what the Comfort Women is, then please look it up. It's known as Uyangbu to many Koreans. It's to do with the Japanese occupation, and it affected many Korean women, but not just Korean women. So where that took place at that station, outside it's sort of above the metro station, as it goes down, you've got this little space where there's a statue there. And the activist friend that I'd met at the screening, she was there. Ironically enough, when I was at the alley, the tragic alley where it happened, I mean, there was one person there, paying his respects, sitting there for ages. It was clearly, I'm pretty sure it was a friend that he'd lost. He used to maybe share cigarettes with and drinks with, and he sat there throughout 1834, which is 6:34, leading up to 7 o'clock. He sat there, solemnly paying his respects, and perhaps very emotional about his loss. That was hard to see, hard to watch. But when I was there, this friend of mine I'd actually met at the film festival through somebody else was near that area, and we then went to that second memorial at the other metro station. And then we actually later on we went to get some Vietnamese food, which I think links nicely to what I was saying about other food in Korea. So that the subject of Itaewon is not an easy one. I was in Korea when it happened 2 years ago. I was actually in Busan, and there was lots of fireworks or Halloween, people dressed up maybe, but it was on that night, the 29th, and I wasn't in Seoul. But a month later I was in Jeju, and the activists that I know near the Navy base, which people want to put an end to, and it's going to be difficult because they've been activists for this Navy base that's for soldiers from the US and elsewhere, I'm sure. There's these activist friends, and they drove us to this memorial in Jeju City, which was for Itaewon. If you want to, on my YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/Jason Verney, if you go back several videos, you'll see sometime in 2023, I think, I uploaded a video, which is a montage from that memorial. So it was essentially candles, people doing some talking, some music, poetry, etc., and it was a very moving experience. But last year I was in Korea, and I think at that time, the end of October, I can't remember which city I was in. It's terrible. But it wasn't in Seoul, that's for sure. It wasn't in Itaewon. So that brings me to the guests, and I'm sorry it's taken so long to get to these, but I've mentioned Joe McPherson. If you do or you don't know, but there's a website called Zen Kimchi. Zen, as in Zen, as in just keeping Zen. He's a foodie. And he not only is a foodie, he does food tours, but him and his sort of collaborative partner, do also other tours. And one of those tours this time around I went on, and it was actually on Halloween. I'm not a big supporter of Halloween in any country. I'm not, I'm from England. Of course, we had Halloween when I was younger. I loved certain films that had Halloween, like E.T., but it's an American thing. I used to love it when I was a child. I don't really, as an adult, not so much. But Joe was the person doing one of those tours, which is called, it's called the Dark Side of Seoul tour, and he runs them a lot of the time. But I was actually fortunate to go along to one that was taking part on Halloween itself. And although obviously Itaewon was fresh in my mind because of the 29th and it being the 31st, which is Halloween, of course it kept coming up in my mind. But either way, Joe makes those tours really entertaining and very, he's very good with his, as I say, it's not always him, it's sometimes Sean, but he's very good with his sort of, his sort of dramatics and giving jokes, but keeping it a little bit spooky, keeping it, dark. And there's a lot of people on this one. I don't know how many, but it could have been 20. And then, for a tour like that, it's for a tour that kind of you walk around. It's all walkable, but you go, because Seoul's very well connected. Certain areas you go from Bukchon, almost to Bukchon, which is almost to the Hanok village area. You go to City Hall area, and he's got his way of doing the tour, and it's very, very, really good. Really good. Sorry, very, really good. He also you can actually do an extended tour, so he ends it at one point. Anyone who wants to stay, they would have probably prepaid for the extended tour. I think you get another hour, but I think you can. I know you can also, if you hadn't booked it, you've then got the choice. I think for about 10,000. I think it was 10,000. For extra 10,000, you can then pay for the 10,000 won, pay for the extra additional time. And I think people did because some people did because it's an entertaining, and you do learn quite a bit, and it's a nice group feeling, and it was Halloween, so I definitely felt that maybe more than another day, perhaps another date. So. Now, just on that subject of Halloween and back to Joe, when I was hanging out with Joe at the Seoul Whistler Film Festival, and of course James, but we caught up a lot. But also when we went out to get food, it was on Friday evening and Saturday evening. There was a lot of people dressed in Halloween things or cosplay and all that, and it did make me think of Itaewon, and it was only 2 years ago and people are still going to go out. I mean, now you hope or pray, if you're inclined to pray, that these things don't happen again. And I will say as well, this is something similar, although it wasn't Halloween, I don't think, but in Indonesia around the same date, I remember that year there was another crush or stampede or similar incident to this Itaewon one. It's not unique to Korea, but obviously this is about Korea. So seeing people dressed in Halloween, hanging around when we were hanging out in Hongdae, it was quite a, I don't know, poignant or sympathy. It brought a lot of memories or things to mind. So we've got these two interviews. Now, one of those is Joe McPherson, which I touched on quite a bit there, but I actually met him in ChiangMai, and with his knowledge of food and his love of food, but his love of food from Korea, from around the world, he will try anything. Food-wise, he will try anything. And when I spoke to him in ChiangMai, it gave me many reasons to. Well, we brought up the subject of an interview, which I think we brought up before, but we had lots of things to talk about. It's quite a long interview that you'll be hearing being put out in in unison, in conjunction with this episode. We cover a lot of topics. We cover his time in his home country. We cover his time since he's been in Korea. Touch a little bit on his family. Touch a bit about podcasts. He runs the Sewol podcast and the Dark Side of Sewol podcast. There's so much that he does. I'm really hoping that people enjoy that interview, because we cover a lot. He's a very enthusiastic interviewee and guest, and I'm very grateful for his time. So you might have already listened to that, because this is, as I say, going out at a similar time, maybe within a few days of each other, but you will hopefully enjoy that interview. It was really nice to see him in ChiangMai. It was also nice to see him in Korea, and it was an on-location interview that you're going to hear as well, and that adds to it. I think that really adds to the vibe, and his responses and his enthusiasm, and perhaps it adds to my questions that I ask. From Judge Joe, as I say, Judge James, I've talked about James Turnbull. He was, he runs the feminism website. It's not just feminism, but it's other stuff as well. It's feminism, sexuality, the grand narrative. Obviously, James, we've had an interview with. Maybe in the future we'll have another one. But with Joe's is running, is in the next episode. And I did mention briefly that somebody I spoke to who's got a very interesting life. Her name is Fran. She's lived in various countries. Korea, of course. She's Korean. Sorry, I should have said that. Fran Lee. She's lived in Israel. She's lived in other countries in Europe. And asked what happened was, we've actually done this interview, and it's either going to be appearing on my YouTube channel as a video first, or the interview or segments of the interview will appear on this podcast and then on my channel. She's the other guest. Now, she's got a YouTube channel called Fran's Fresh Start in ChiangMai. And as I mentioned before, there's lots of Koreans that come through ChiangMai, that live in ChiangMai. She does videos about renovating condos and, from sort of renovating apartments in Chiang Mai, but also she talks about her life before. And when I spoke to her, and again, we might do another interview later on, I spoke about sort of Korea-related questions and things in her life that's not Korean, but also about her life in, just asking questions about her life in general. That might appear as a half episode, but it's definitely coming up in some form or another. If I end up just putting it as a video, then that will be also announced. There's other guests. We're also nearing the end of season 2, because this is once this and Joe's interview, Joe McPherson's interview goes out, that will be 48 episodes. I think there might have been a bonus one over the years, since we started this, and over the couple of years, and I'm stopping that at 50 because that's what I tend to do, and then there might be a bonus one after that, and then we'll go into series 3. When that will be, whether that will be a few weeks gap or a month or two break, because I do need a break as well. But I'm hoping to I'm hoping to have some interesting interviews and or episodes, or both, before the end of series 2. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's really hot now. It's been talking without the aircon on for this long here in Phuket. I'm in the Bang Tao area. It's actually got the actual area's got another name as well, but Chong Tail maybe. But my sister's arriving. When I record this, my sister's arriving tomorrow. But when I get this out, the date might be a few days difference. But there was a lot to talk about there, and if you stayed to the end, then well done. And I'll just leave you with the words Annyeonghi, Geseyo. And now some news just in. Just an amendment and a couple of additions to that episode that you've just heard. One of those being that Itaewon video, which is on my YouTube channel. That actually was recorded a week after the Itaewon tragedy. I remember now, and if you watch the video, it actually comes up within a minute or so in the titles, but I actually remember it was a week, and it actually says that. It just feels like a month after the event, because a lot happened in that week from after that incident. I was in Busan when it happened in 2022. A couple of days later, I was in Jeju already, and within a few days later, I suppose, I was then taken to Jeju City for that memorial. So it felt like maybe it was a month after. It was actually within a week after, literally a week later. Obviously there was memorials elsewhere, but this is something certain activist friends had put together on Jeju. A couple of other things relating to the festivals and people I met. I really wanted to just mention people. I always meet different people at Busan International Film Festival, and there's a couple of people I do want to give a shout out to. First, just to mention the Seoul Whistler Film Festival, because that, although I've mentioned quite a bit about it already, there was one person I really wanted to give a shout out to, a fellow creative. Her name is Haein. We met up in Seoul, in Sinchon area. We met up, she's an artist, she's a musician, and all kinds, she's got other talents, but we met up in the daytime, and by the time the festival came, which started late afternoon, early evening, she remained with us and joined us through the whole festival and the party. And it was really nice because I hadn't really properly sat down to catch up with her before. So for her to be there on the opening day or opening night of the film festival was great, and I think she really enjoyed it. There was a film or two she saw as well as the party, and she met Joe and Carl and others, and of course Solji, and so it was a really good atmosphere. Then bringing me on to Busan, BIFF, Busan International Film Festival this year, and we are talking 2024 now. I know I was talking 2022 for the Itaewon tragedy, but a couple of people I really want to give a shout out to is someone else I met, someone I already mentioned in this episode. That's Jihan Kwon. She and I go way back. Not only is she an artist and works on film projects, but this might have been the first time we met in Busan, but it was definitely the first time we met with her collaborators who had a film that they were trying to show. They were trying to do a screening of it on the beach, Hongdae. But it was nice to hang around with Jihan in Busan because we're both film people, whether that's fanatics or filmmakers, and she's really into, important subject matters as well. And as I say, I had also caught her exhibition at Art Noid in Seoul before heading to Busan. So it was a handful of days later that she and I managed to catch up in Busan itself, and had a great sort of chat. We went to the Indonesian party together as well with her and her film friends, and it was a really good time. The other couple of people I want to mention I also met at Busan International Film Festival. One is Claire Marty, and because although we kind of see each other usually at least once at the Busan International Film Festival most years that I'm there. This time, although we grabbed a few minutes at the start of the film festival, we had a nice catch up, and I hadn't done that with her for a while because we'd often bumped into each other at film festivals or the parties. You do catch up a little, but we caught up on a couple of occasions, and she's someone who I really respect and the team that she works with, if anybody knows from the UK, Terracotta Distribution, that's the distribution label for lots of Asian films, and Third Window Films, and basically she's worked with those to get films out there, whether it's on DVD or Blu-ray or perhaps even on their Terracotta Distribution website where they have videos on demand and stuff. But what she does and what the team at Terracotta and Third Window really do it's been something that I've really been behind ever since I started my website, Mini Movie, probably about 15 years ago maybe, or just after. I was always an advocate for what they do, and when the riots happened in 2011, they were affected hugely. The warehouse that was where these companies, not just Terracotta, there was not just Terracotta and Third Window, and there is a connection now with Arrow Films as well with Terracotta and Third Window. Anyway, it was really nice to catch up with her. Another person was Stefan. Stefan is from Kino Korea, so it's Kino Korea, and I think on Instagram it's Kino Korea Podcast, but he's based in Berlin, and again a cinephile, and he has things to do with film festivals, to do with Korean films, and we've bumped into each other. We've met up on purpose at Busan International Film Festival, and it's always nice to speak to Stefan. He's got as much enthusiasm, he's got more enthusiasm perhaps than me for Korean cinema, and we chatted quite a bit in a short amount of time about Korean cinema. So it was really good to catch up with Stefan. Of course, there was other people. There was my friend Wendy. She's a cineast who loves Asian films, and she was for a while. She was based in New Malden, so where I was living. But also, we met at Busan International Film Festival maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and we've kind of meet every now and again there. As I say, there's other people I bump into, but I'm going to leave it at that. I just wanted to sort of mention the people that I hung around with. They just deserve a bit of this shout out goodness at the end of this episode. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. See ya. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. So that's all from us. 안녕히 계세요. The original version of this video was uploaded to Jason Verney's YouTube channel, where it and many other videos, podcasts, snippets and films can be found. That channel can be found at youtube.com/Jason Verney.